Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to share with you 5 tips I wish I had known before I started oil painting. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll have a bonus 6th tip that you might find to be helpful. So starting off, my first tip is geared towards people who maybe haven't tried oil painting before and want to get into it. And so my first tip is don't be afraid of oil painting. And I know that sounds silly, it's just paint, but in all honesty, before I started oil painting, I had this misconception about oil painting, that it was an incredibly unforgiving medium, that it was going to be incredibly difficult to kind of wrap my head around, and that's really not true. Once I started getting into oil painting, I got really comfortable with it really fast, and I actually figured out through just practice that oil painting is one of the most forgiving painting mediums out there. I find it more forgiving than watercolor. I find it more forgiving than acrylic or just ink. I love oil painting, and it's really not something to be afraid of. I know it can seem a little daunting at first. I experienced that, but don't be afraid. Watch some videos, watch some speed paints, get some more tips from what I'm just going to share with you today about oil painting, and jump right in because it's really not something to be too afraid about. So my next couple tips are going to be for beginner oil painters or people that have already been oil painting and just want to get some new opinions about people's experiences with the medium. So my second tip is use a lot of paint. When I started out oil painting, I would use very, very thin layers, and I'd put the paint on my brush and I'd try to make it last for a long, long time. And oil paint is all about building up layers. You don't need to be afraid of using a lot of paint. So really load up that brush, put down thick layers of paint. It'll make going back and blending your tones a lot easier, and it's just, don't be afraid of using a lot of paint. I feel like a lot of people try to use a very small amount and try to make it last a long time, and you really don't need to do that. You can really lay the paint on thick, and you'll have an easier time blending if you do so. This goes into my next and third tip, which is all about blending. So this will just be my personal favorite way of going about blending. This is not the correct way. This is not the perfect, everyone loves this way. Just through experience, this is the method that works best for me, and it might work best for you if you want to give it a try. And if you watch closely, this is actually what I do in this painting. So when I go about blending, I will always lay down blocks of color. So I'll look at the image that I'm trying to paint, my reference photo, and I'll look for areas that have an area of color that I've pre-mixed prior to painting. And so I'll block all those sections off and I'll paint. Each color I'll take and I'll look where on the painting did I find was a block of that color, and I'll go and I'll block it in on the painting. And I'll leave about a very couple millimeters of space of white canvas around the blocks of color so that none of them are touching. And then towards my final passes on the painting, I will go in with a dry brush or a brush with a light layer of one of the colors of the blocks. And then I will very slowly just do a couple passes on the white lines between my color blocks. I find this is a really great way of keeping your colors clean. If you scrub all your colors together, just go back and forth really fast, and you're blending entire sections, you can really start to get muddy colors, and you start to lose some of the definition of those areas that you saw in the photograph. So I always keep those white spaces around my color blocks just a couple millimeters, and then when I go about blending, I just take that clean brush or with a light layer of one of the colors from the blocks, and I do a couple passes on those borders with the white canvas. And it basically just smoothly creates a gradient in between the two color blocks. So you have a hard time telling when it transitions from one to the other. However, there are clear sections of those colors, which will keep your painting from overall having too many muddy colors overall. So my fourth tip is to take your time. And this goes back to, my first tip where I said that oil painting is one of the most forgiving mediums when you actually get used to it. And this is the reason why, my fourth tip of taking your time. Oil paint is great because it dries so slowly, and you can even modify how fast the drying time takes. You can speed it up by adding certain mediums like Gamsol or other paint thinners, or you can add things like Galkyd to slow drying time. So if you want to control the speed of the drying time of your paint, you can. But the main thing is, if you're just starting out with oil painting and you're too worried about getting into the paint mediums, you can just focus on straight oil paint, and straight oil paint dries very slowly. So you can spend multiple days working on one painting. You can work on a section one day, the next day come back to it or start a new section, and the paint will most likely still be wet, still be workable, and you can keep working it for days. You can really, really take your time on an oil painting, and you can really take your time to make each thing exactly how you want it to be, make each area of the painting perfect to you, and you don't need to stress about making sure that you blend your areas before the paint dries. This is one of the reasons why I prefer oil painting to mediums such as watercolor or acrylic, because it just dries so fast as soon as you put the paint on the page. And so you really have to know what you're doing going in if you're using those mediums. With oil paint, you have some forgiveness, and so you can kind of build your ideas and your image as you paint. It's not definite. A paint stroke that you put down is not going to be some permanent mistake or choice that you make. You always have time to rework it. So my final main tip number 5, is all about mixing colors. And this, I have to say, is one of the most important tips. I don't know how I can stress it enough. And I think even if you are an oil painter now and you're having trouble with like muddy colors, for instance, this might be a really useful tip for you. So if you're starting out in oil painting, I would recommend you get 5 colors of oil paint: white, black, yellow, red, and blue. So white, black, and your primaries. And one, this is just nice because if you're starting out with oil painting, it means you can be selective and you can have an entry, a cheaper budget entry into oil painting. You only need to buy a few colors. Now, this is really important. I got a kit of oil paints when I first started and had a ton of different tubes of oil color. And so a lot of people's first reaction is just to go in and use all the tubes and mix and things like that. But it's really difficult to keep your colors clean if you're mixing from different tubes that aren't just primaries. You have to have a really good understanding of color theory so you can determine what some of those non-primary tubes, what colors they're based in. And it can be really hard to determine that relationship between colors when you don't have a firm understanding of the medium oil painting or of color theory in general. So I recommend always mixing when you're starting out using your primary colors along with white. And I wouldn't mix in black, but if you have an area that needs to be black, you can use black paint. So the reason why I say this is because the primaries are honestly what make up every color. You can create any color on the color wheel by mixing your 3 primaries. If you use your 3 primaries and you mix them together, you will start to learn a basic understanding of color theory just from practice and learning to mix those 3 primaries together. And in doing so, by only mixing 3 primary colors, it's going to be a lot harder for you to create muddy pigments that don't blend well together. If you use paint out of tubes that aren't necessarily primaries when you start, and so you try to mix a teal with like a orange or like a other purple or even another blue, that teal might be based in another area and that blue might be a little different and they might mix to create a muddy color. So when you're starting out, try using red, yellow, and blue to mix all of your colors. If you are an already practicing oil painter and you've been having trouble with muddy colors, or you just want to get a better grasp on color theory, I highly recommend mixing with only primaries. It can really boost your skills in determining kind of how colors work and getting a basis of that color theory through practice. All right, so real quick before my bonus tip, I just want to say if you enjoyed today's video, please make sure to like and subscribe and pop a comment down below. Help me out. The algorithm loves some good comments, and I'd really appreciate any feedback you had about today's video, or if you have any tips on oil painting, share them below. I'm still learning, and I'm sure anyone else watching this video would love to hear some other people's tips and tricks when it comes to oil painting. So my final tip is kind of a novelty tip. I'm sure a lot of people might know this, but a lot of people might not. And it's something I didn't know when I started, and it really did save me a lot of time. So my 6th bonus tip is you don't have to clean your brush every time you change colors. So when I started out oil painting, I'd mix all my colors before I started, which I still do now, and I would load up the color on a brush, paint the section with that color, and then I'd pour out some Gamsol, which is a mineral spirit to clean brushes. I'd clean the brush off completely. I'd wipe off the Gamsol. I'd go to the next color. You don't have to do this. Oil paint is a really, really thick and opaque, most of the time, medium. So if you have some paint on your brush and you pick up another color that's fairly similar, or even if it's slightly different, it lays on top really nicely, and you can just paint on the canvas and you'll get the color you just picked up. Oil paint is so thick, you really, really don't have to clean your brush every single time. And if you mix your colors beforehand and you're doing something like a portrait, like I do in this video, I mixed 3 shades that were relatively similar. So when I picked up one color, I'd paint, and then I just pick up the next. I wouldn't clean my brush in between because they shared a similar color relationship, and because oil paint's so thick, you really don't need to clean your brush off to get clean colors laid down on your paper or your canvas, whichever surface you are painting on. Now, if you're doing a color that's completely opposite, so say I'm painting an area black and then I want to add in some white highlights, I definitely clean my brush then because I don't want gray highlights. And colors that are that drastic, you might get a little bleed through with that. But if you're laying down some base colors, you do not need to clean your brush every time. All right, everyone, that's 5 different tips that I wish I had known when I started oil painting, along with a bonus tip. Hopefully someone learned something. I hope maybe some of these tips were new to you, and I hope they help you in your oil painting journey. Thank you very much for watching, and if you want to see a full speed paint of this painting, subscribe to the channel and it will be posted in the coming days. Thank you very much.